All right, welcome everybody. I would like to introduce Rachel Teresa Ivanovich. Rachel is the founder and the Chief Leadership Officer of Easy Life Management. She is a business coach and enrolled agent, and she earned her MBA from San Diego State University. I also want to say that Rachel is a longtime chamber member and a great asset to the chamber. She has done workshops for us before, and we are always so pleased to have her. So Rachel, I'd like to say welcome. I do want to mention that quickly, if you have questions while she's doing her presentation, ask that you type them into the chat. At the end, we will have time for question and answer. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Thanks for having me today. And thank you all for joining the workshop today. I know this is a really exciting and fun subject. So thanks for giving up your afternoon to join me. So just to start out, my objective today for you is to answer all your questions that I can and to be a resource for you and any of your friends that own businesses. We've all been asking all summer, how do I achieve forgiveness for my PPP loan? So that's really the subject of today's presentation. Then also, what if I don't obtain forgiveness, and other relief and updates I wanted to provide you today as well. So as Kathy mentioned, please save your questions to the very end. I will answer all questions that I can, and those that I don't have answers to right now, I will definitely research those for you after this workshop. So to get started, I just want to give you a few PPP payroll protection program statistics. So as of August 8th, you may or may not know more than 5 million businesses had received funding, which is over $525 billion. And the SBA did open the forgiveness portal back in August. So I don't know if you've submitted your application. I'm assuming since you're on this workshop that you haven't yet done so. But what's interesting is, the average loan size was fairly small. It was $100,729. And then when the portal when the application period closed, there's still $134 billion left in the PPP fund. And potentially they will be opening up additional application period coming up soon. I think they were waiting for the election this last Tuesday to happen before they passed additional bills that are sitting with Congress. There are 3 bills currently. So further guidance may be forthcoming. We're hoping, as advisors, we're hoping that there is additional guidance coming. So at this point, a lot of the questions that we may have, we don't have answers to. So as of October 8th, thankfully, they made the forgiveness process much simpler for those of us who have loans, PPP loans that are under $50,000. So previously, if you've been part of my other presentations, you may have heard about the full-time equivalent and wage reduction calculations that had to happen if you did lay off employees or reduce salaries. So if your PPP loan is under $50,000, then these calculations no longer apply to you. It's not really the automatic forgiveness that we as advisors have been hoping for, but it's definitely better than that horrible application that was out there previously. So the $50,000 limit. So I'm assuming a lot of you potentially have PPP loans under $50,000. Basically, if your payroll in 2019 was less than $20,000 a month, this probably applies to you. Just so that you kind of have an idea, a little bit more than 2/3 of all PPP loans were less than $50,000. They were totaling 3.5 million of all the loans that were given. So this is what the new form looks like, the 3508S. It's very simple. Most of the banks are also utilizing this form, or they're calling it the lender equivalent of this form. Most of the lenders, they already will have filled out a lot of these sections for you. As you can see, it's very, very easy information, your loan number and so on, legal name. The thing that you really want to keep in mind that a lot of people have asked me about is right over here where it says idle advance amount. So if you received the EIDL grant or advance, and typically this would have been $1,000 per employee. At the very beginning, back in March and April, May, a lot of companies did receive the full $10,000. Then they did scale this back to $1,000 per employee if you were a sole proprietor and it was just you, then you would have gotten $1,000. And they have clarified that this advance at this time is not forgivable. So if your PPP loan was $40,000 and you received $5,000 EIDL advance, then you have to subtract that off and you do have to pay that advance back. It is no longer considered a grant. It does become part of the PPP loan. So the rest of the form, it's a simple one-page form. There are a bunch of questions. You just have to check the box, the answers to, and sign and date it. You probably will be doing this electronically. So let's just kind of get into some of the details behind how to calculate the actual amount that does go on this forgiveness amount line. So just some FAQ on this. If your payroll protection program loan was less than $50,000, you will be using this 3508S form. Everyone else will be using the SBA form 3508. So the S does stand for simplified. The lenders do have equivalent forms that they are on their websites or through your banking online portal that you will want to use. They have also clarified that you won't have to be mailing in any documents, that all documents can be submitted electronically. So scanned copies are acceptable, as are e-signatures. So no need to print everything out and mail it. You do have a lot of time to submit your loan application. So my advice is not to rush out there and apply for forgiveness quite yet. You probably want to submit your loan application within 10 months of the completion of your covered period, which is either 8 or 24 weeks, but I'll get into that a little bit more later in the presentation. For those of you who received your PPP funds later on in the year, maybe even in August or September, your covered period may not extend beyond December 31st of this year, so do keep that in mind when calculating your forgiveness amount. And finally, they did clarify that expenses that were incurred or paid do count, and I will explain what that means a little bit later. One of the big things that they really are concerned about and that I will cover during the presentation is they really didn't mean for the payroll protection program to be to make owners rich or to enrich them. So there are caps on owner wages that we'll discuss during this presentation. So in terms of the payroll paycheck protection program loan terms, it is a loan until it is forgiven. So right now, hopefully you've got this recorded on your balance sheet as a liability to your company. It should not be showing up on your profit and loss. The loan terms will depend on when you did receive your PPP loan. If you received it before June 5th, you can choose between an 8 or a 24 week covered period. If you received it after June 5th, then you have to choose the 24-week period. The loan payments will be deferred for 10 months after the end of your covered period, and I'll give you some examples how that works in a bit. If your loan is not forgiven, the interest rate on the balance is at 1%. That is a fixed rate. And interest will accrue from the first day that the funds were deposited in your bank. You can pay it back at any time. There are no prepayment penalties on the PPP loan. And the maturity date of this loan is it needs to be paid back within 2 years if it was received before June 5th and 5 years if you received it after June 5th. And that's on the amount that's not forgiven. So first of all, let's talk about the covered period and if you should choose 8 or 24 weeks. So there's technically no due date for filing this forgiveness application. So this is a loan. However, we all want to achieve as much forgiveness as possible. So clearly we're going to choose the period that is going to yield the most amount of forgiveness. So the first payment on your loan is deferred to 10 months after the end of your forgiveness period. So here's your example. So let's pretend that your funds were received April 30th. If you choose a 24-week period, that would be October 15th, so last month. Your loan payments would need to start 10 months after that. So you don't have to pay any payments until August of 2021. And you can apply for forgiveness anytime during this period. So you're going to be using Form 3508, 3508EZ, or 3508S. At this time, the bank, once you submit your application, the bank has 60 days to review your paperwork. Then they're going to send it off to the SBA, which the SBA has 90 days to review and make a determination of how much of your loan is going to be forgiven. So when you're calculating your forgiveness amount, you really want to keep three main rules in mind. The loan amount will be forgiven as long as your loan proceeds are used to cover payroll costs, and it has to be more than 60% of the loan. Second of all, you can use 40% or less, and those costs are mortgage interest, rent payments, or utility costs. If your PPP loan is more than $50,000, you also have to maintain your employee count and compensation levels. If your loan is less than $50,000, this no longer applies to you as of October 8th. So let's talk a little bit more about eligible expenses. So eligible expenses, as I mentioned, 60% of which have to be higher than, and they're calling this the 60% rule, have to be payroll costs. And we'll talk a little bit more about what and define payroll costs, including benefits. Benefits will include health insurance, and that also includes vision and dental benefits. So if you pay interest on a mortgage, that mortgage had to be in place before February 15th of 2020 to count as an eligible expense. Same thing for rent. If you're paying rent, you couldn't have gone out and leased an office space just to achieve forgiveness. Your lease agreement had to be enforced before February 15th of 2020. Utility payments, which they have clarified cell phone bills do count, but had to be in service prior to February 15th of this year. So practitioners are stressing best practices, and those best practices currently are to stuff as much forgiveness into the safe things. So for instance, payroll costs are safe expenses. You don't want to go crazy and start, second guessing, should I, can I write off, or eligible expenses, car, or don't second guess this. Payroll costs are safe. So definitely use as much payroll costs as possible to achieve forgiveness. As of May 22nd, the interim final rule for the SBA did say that bonuses and hazard pay count as part of payroll costs. But the wage caps do come into consideration here. And I'm going to go into that in just a minute. I'm going to give you some examples as how to calculate them. Because this definitely will play a factor as to whether you get forgiveness or not on your PPP. So once you've stuffed as much as possible into payroll costs, then work out from there using benefits, 2020 retirement contributions, and then move on to non-payroll eligible expenses such as rent, mortgage interest, or utilities. Really don't try to go into gray areas because you really, really want to achieve forgiveness on this because it is possible. So one of the questions I had a lot of from clients are in regards to expenses that were paid or incurred outside of the covered period. So for instance, let's say your business received its PPP loan on July 1st and has a payday on July 1st. However, there was payroll for the pay period in June, which is before the PPP loan was received. So because that payroll was paid within the PPP forgiveness period of July 1st, that payday counts and that payroll counts as an eligible expense, even though all the pay was earned by your employees in June. So they did clarify that paid or incurred, those expenses will count. Same thing if the payroll costs occur on the other side. So for instance, the payroll costs were incurred during the forgiveness period, but they were paid after the forgiveness period. So I put an example there for you. So let's just say that Your period ended on September 30th, but the wages were paid for hours worked outside of the period. The forgiveness will still count as long as it's paid or incurred during your covered period. So a lot of clients have asked me, what are payroll costs for purposes of the PPP? So payroll costs are salaries and wages, commissions and tips, they count. However, there are caps on this, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Even costs for vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave count, as do group healthcare benefits. Payment for retirement benefits also count, as do state and local taxes, such as the state unemployment insurance. Those are employer taxes paid directly to the EDD or to the Texas Workforce Commission if you're in Texas. I think I saw Penny Boot on here. And then I also saw the Godfrey, so in Nevada as well, if you're paying SUI. If you are a sole proprietor, which a few of you are, then your net earnings from self-employment, those are your payroll costs. I've had a lot of sole proprietors who file Schedule C ask, well, I don't have payroll because it's just me, I don't have employees. So whatever your net income on your Schedule C, those are your payroll costs. So what will you owe money on? So you will owe money on this PPP loan if you use the loan amount for anything other than the eligible expenses that we were just talking about. So don't get creative. Payroll costs are your safest bet. Mortgage interest, rent payments, and utilities are really the safest things to spend money on if you want to achieve forgiveness. If the amount allocated to payroll costs are less than 60%, then those amounts are not going to count towards the forgiveness amount. If your loan is over $50,000 and you don't reinstore the number of full-time equivalent employees or your compensation levels by December 31st, you also will not achieve forgiveness. So let's talk a little bit more about wage limits and payroll caps, because payroll is, as we talked about, the most important and the safest eligible expense when it comes to obtaining forgiveness. So for non-owners, if you choose the 8-week forgiveness period, you have a cap of $15,385 that can be put into the category to be forgiven. If you choose the 24-week forgiveness period, that number is quite a bit higher. If you're an owner of the business, they have, and we talked about the fact that they don't want the owners to be enriched because of the PPP loan. So therefore your caps are much lower for that 24-week forgiveness period. So I'm going to give you a few examples as to how this works a little bit later on. So again, what are wages? So based on some FAQs that were published August 4th by the SBA, they did say that and define wages as gross wages before deductions. So sole proprietors, again, that's your net income on your Schedule C. For business owners, think about your box 5 of your W-2. Those are your wages subject to Medicare tax. If you are an S-Corp shareholder employee, you're going to have to deal with the health insurance premiums. So you're going to pull that box 5 amount, but you're going to add your health insurance premiums to that amount as well. Because based on IRS guidance, you have to add your health insurance premiums if you're an S-Corp shareholder owner to box 1 wages, and they're not included in box 5. So the calculation is just a little bit different. The SBA did say to count those healthcare premiums as wages, so that's what you're going to go ahead and do. So first of all, who's an owner? So sole proprietors, you are owners of your business. So think about your net profit from your business. If you're an owner of a C corporation or an S corporation, for PPP purposes, if you own more than 5% of that corporation, you are considered an owner, and those caps apply to you. The interim financial rules that the SBA has put out don't address partners in a partnership, so I'm assuming that partners are considered owners of the partnership. So reminding you again, those limits for owners on what you can include as part of a forgivable expense for PPP purposes. $15,384 for an 8-week covered period, and $20,833 for a 24-week covered period. The owner limits are going to be really important to keep in mind when you're calculating how much. Again, to remind you, C corporation owners, your wages will count. They're not, the health insurance does not count as part of the cap, part of that, because for C corporations, you can add in all of your health insurance premiums as an eligible expense. S corporation, the rules are different for you, and your health insurance does count as part of that $15,000 or $20,000 cap. For C Corp owners, your state and local taxes will count in full as an eligible expense for forgiveness, as do employer retirement contributions. You do have to keep in mind that you can't take, if you paid more in 2020, you can't use that amount. You have to look to your 2019 amounts. If in 2019 you paid less, you have to take 2.5 divided by 12 of your 2019 amounts. You have to take whatever's less though. For S Corp owners, again, you have to be really careful because your health insurance is counted as part of the wage cap. So you're going to look to your box 5 and box 1 numbers on your W-2 when calculating these amounts. You don't want to put too much on the forgiveness line if you're an S Corp shareholder, because they will draw the line at the $15,000 or $20,000 cap line. Luckily, the state and local taxes do count in full for S Corp owners, as do the employer retirement contributions. But again, the same thing applies. You need to be looking at your 2019 payroll reports as well as your 2020 payroll reports, and you're going to be taking whatever amounts are less when calculating the figures. So I'm giving you some examples, and if you want me to share these slides with you after this presentation, please feel free to email the chamber, Kathy@carlsbad.org, or you can email me. We'll be happily send you these slides so you can look at these examples, because I know that when I start looking at these numbers, I start to glaze over, and this is what I do for a living. So I can only imagine right now everyone is probably gone to sleep. So make sure you go get some caffeine if you need it right about now. So here's your example. So let's just say I'm 100% owner of an S corporation called Elm Inc., and I get paid bi-weekly. In 2019, Rachel's salary was $50,400 or $2,100 per payday. In 2020, Rachel's salary increased, hallelujah, to $57,600 or $2,400 per payday. Thankfully, Elm also pays $10,000 of insurance premiums for Rachel, and has done so both in 2019 and 2020. And because Elm is an S corporation, that $10,000 is counted as wages for purposes of income. Elm also pays 3% of Rachel's wages as a retirement contribution. So based on the above salary amounts, $1,800 in 2019 and $1,950 in 2020. So because those health insurance premiums are wages, Rachel's compensation for 2019 is the $50,400 plus the $10,000 insurance premiums for a total of $60,400, and for 2020 it's $67,600. So how do I apply the limits in this situation? So let's just say there are 4 paydays in an 8-week period and 12 paydays in a 24-week period. So in our 8-week example, Rachel's wages without the health insurance premiums would have been $9,600, and in the 24-week period, wages would have been $28,800. And retirement contributions, 3% of $9,600 is $288, or if I use the 24-week period, $864. And the health insurance premiums are $1,538 over 8 weeks, $46.15 over 24 weeks. So because those health insurance premiums count as wages, Rachel's total wages paid are actually $11,138 or $33,415 for a 24-week period. So there are a lot of different caps you have to look at when you're calculating this. So my advice to you is to make sure that you've got your payroll journals, and your 941s available for both 2019 and 2020 available, as well as health insurance information before you start calculating this information. Otherwise, you're not going to get very far. So the first step here is to apply that wage limitation on the wages paid. So the 8-week cap is $15,385. In some examples, it's $15,384, so don't get confused. So because Rachel was paid $11,138 during that 8-week period, you'd use that lower number because it's less than the 8-week cap. However, with the 8-week forgiveness, you have to use the lesser of 2020 or 2019. So that's why I said, make sure you've got your 941s and payroll journals for both years, because of the salary increase in 2020, you have to play the limitations based on the 2019 numbers. And therefore, the salary amounts for 2019 are only $9,292. And make sure that if you're an S corporation, you're including those insurance premiums, because that's part of your calculation that are subject to the wage caps. So for forgiveness, on that forgiveness line, you do use the $9,292 for the cash compensation that counts towards the forgiveness amount. The next step is, if you do pay retirement contributions, those will be also added to the forgiveness amount. But you have to compare what you paid in 2019 with what you paid in 2020 and add that to the cash from this prior slide, the cash compensation. So this 92.92 gets added to the 288. However, 2019 contributions are less, so you have to take the lesser amount. So the total forgiveness amount for the 8-week period is only $95.69. So because the original PPP loan was $12,948, it would be silly to use an 8-week covered period, and you want to calculate it out over the 24-week period instead to see if you obtain a better result. Under this 8-week example, the 60% rule has been fulfilled, meaning payroll costs are more than 60% of the total loan. So that $95.69 would qualify for forgiveness, but we wouldn't achieve 100% loan forgiveness in this example. Elm Inc. would have to have non-payroll costs of at least $32.79 in addition to that above figure to achieve 100% forgiveness on the PPP loan under the 8-week scenario. So let's just say, instead, let's calculate it out over 24 weeks. In this situation, it's much easier to achieve loan forgiveness, as you can see down here, because we'd only need $365 of non-payroll costs to achieve 100% forgiveness under this example, because the cash compensation that actually qualifies for forgiveness in this example is $12,583. So there are a lot of caps, there's a lot of numbers to consider. Again, I'm going to send out these slides so that you can look at them. And if you need help calculating your own particular situation, please feel free to reach out to us. So I wanted to also give an example for sole proprietors, because for sole proprietors, the calculation is much, much simpler. It's simply a mechanical calculation based on your 2019 Schedule C. So make sure you pull your tax return that you filed for 2019. You're going to look at your net income, which is line 31. You're going to apply the wage caps, which is $15,385 if you use an 8-week forgiveness period, or $20,833 for a 24-week forgiveness period. Keep in mind, health insurance paid and retirement contributions do not count for sole proprietors. It's simply, you're going to be taking a calculation based off line 31 of your Schedule C. What we've been finding is that the 24-week covered period typically guarantees 100% forgiveness for sole proprietors. So we are advising that you use the 24-week covered period for your forgiveness amount if you're a sole proprietor. So I did another example for you here. Rachel's now a sole proprietor with net income on Schedule C in 2019 of $50,400. As you can see, the forgiveness amount for the 8-week covered period is only $77.54. but the original PPP loan was $10,500. So using a 24-week forgiveness period guarantees that $10,500 result, meaning you get 100% forgiveness on this PPP loan. So how do you go about requesting forgiveness? So the portals are open with most of the banks. Given the fact that the rules changed on October 8th, a lot of the lenders have not updated their portals. I talked to a client today with Union Bank who is trying to submit their application under the new rules, and it has not been updated yet. So my advice is to wait maybe a few more weeks, maybe a month, until we have a little bit more guidance and clarification, especially on a couple of items that I will talk about in just a minute. Be sure that you have your documents ready to upload to when you're going about applying for forgiveness, because you will fill out the application and then they'll give you the option to upload your documents. Similar to when you were applying for the loan in the beginning, you wanted to have all your documents ready to go before you actually applied. Make sure that you have copies of lease agreements if you're including rent expense as part of your non-payroll eligible expenses. If you are including mortgage interest, make sure you have copies of your loan disclosure available. Any copies of payments and bills you will want to have available. You may not need to submit those, but you do need to keep those. And then again, as I mentioned at the beginning, your lender has 60 days to make a decision and to forward it onto the SBA, and then the SBA has 90 days to send you their answer. So that's 5 months there. So if you look at the end of your covered period, count out 10 months from there. You want to make sure that you apply in time so you don't have to begin making those payments at the end of your 10-month deferment period. My tip to you is really to check with your lender, call your bank. If you have a contact with the bank, make sure you're talking with them about what they're specifically going to be looking for. Different banks are asking for different documentation. So make sure you're checking in with them. Some other answers that I just wanted to cover are costs. We did go over the incurred or paid rule again, but just keep in mind if costs incurred, they were prior to your covered period, they do count as long as they were paid during the covered period. Same thing with costs paid after the covered period, but incurred during your covered period, those count as well. An answer that a lot of clients have asked me, does interest on credit cards count? And the answer to this question is credit card interest does not count. If you renewed your lease or refinanced your mortgage during after the time that you received your PPP funds, those payments do count as long as your lease was in place or the mortgage was in place prior to February 15th of 2020. The other thing that I've had questions on is if you're paying related party rent, that rent expense does not count. What that means is, for instance, you own an S corporation, you have a home office, your S corporation pays you rent and you pick that up as income on your personal return, that rent expense does not count. So if you are paying yourself rent and claiming it as income on your 1040 or Schedule E, that doesn't count as an eligible expense for purposes of forgiveness for the PPP. So do you feel like that right now? I feel like that most of the time, just kidding. So make sure you're reviewing the form 3508 or the lender equivalent before you start to apply for forgiveness, just so that you have everything ready to upload to the portal before you begin. So I'm going to give you 5 accounting tips to achieve loan forgiveness over the next 10 minutes or so, and then you can I can answer any questions that you still might have. So the first tip that I have is most payroll companies, payroll providers have excellent PPP reports available. Check the report tab in your payroll provider portal under COVID-19 or just under reports. I've been printing those out for clients. They're perfect. They're exactly what the lenders are looking for. So be sure you're using your payroll provider as a resource at this time. The other forms that you're going to need to have available are your IRS Form 941s and any payroll journals showing your SUI paid, the state unemployment insurance paid. If your PPP loan is over $50,000, you're going to need to document hours and number of employees. So payroll journals are helpful with that, as are California forms DE9 and DE9C. I believe other states have these forms available as well. So be sure you're using your payroll provider as a resource during this time. And again, that the 60% of the PPP loan needed to go towards payroll costs over the 8 to 24 week period. But I think I talked enough about that already. Make sure you're using your accounting software and printing out a profit and loss statement for the covered period. You can go and customize reports, and you can make sure that you are printing out detail reports for each category. So for utilities, for rent expense, and then if you've got the mortgage loan interest, again, 40% of your PPP funds can go to non-payroll costs. These documents, you may not need to upload them to your lender, but it's really good to have them handy. And I would just say, make sure you're saving them, because you're going to need to keep these for 6 years after you achieve your loan forgiveness. The third tip I have for you is to make sure you're tracking the funds and how you spent them. Again, you're printing out detail report for each category. And I would say in the memo area in your payroll software, or your software, your QuickBooks or Xero or FreshBooks, whatever you're using, make sure you're putting in the memo or detail area PPP payment or disbursements, just so that it's really clear that the loan money and the loan funds went to cover those expenses. Make sure you're finding the corresponding receipts or bills for those disbursements now, and save those in PDF format, digital format, so that you have those all together. Just like in any sort of an audit, you want to have all your documents together. You don't want to be digging for them 3 years from now if you need to find them, because that just causes stress and headache, and you want to avoid that. So start now. Again, like I said, there's no actual due date for this application, for the forgiveness application. The deferment period ends, again, 10 months after the end of your covered period, either 8 weeks or 24 weeks after you receive your loan funds. So you don't have to rush out there and apply right away. Just make sure that you're getting all your ducks in a row, make sure you have all your documentation, so that you can achieve the maximum amount of forgiveness of your PPP loan. And I do have a couple of clients that have already filed their forgiveness applications and have been granted forgiveness. So this does happen. The biggest loan was $76,000, so that was a huge win. So don't worry, we're going to get you through this. We're going to walk with you each step of the way. Don't wait until the end of your 24-week period is over to start gathering your documentation. Make sure you're doing it contemporaneously, or as you go, so that you have everything ready to submit, or to substantiate what you're going to be using. The fourth tip I have is make sure you're over documenting owner compensation. The PPP loan was not meant to enrich owners. As we've talked about over and over during this presentation, there are wage caps on owner compensation, which are much lower than for other employees of your companies. So be sure, again, that you have your 2019 and 2020 payroll records and payroll tax filings available before you start this process. If you don't have them available, it's really easy to get frustrated, because you're going to have to go digging for different reports. For self-employed individuals, process is going to be simplified, thank goodness. Just make sure you have your 2019 Schedule C available, and look to line 31 on your Schedule C. And hopefully self-employed individuals should get full forgiveness, unless, of course, the caveat on this is if you did get that EIDL advance or grant, which was maybe $1,000, so maybe you have to pay that $1,000 back. For LLCs and partnerships, make sure that you have your Schedule K1s available for 2019, and look to boxes 1 and 4A of your Schedule K1s. That's considered your payroll costs for partnerships and LLCs. And then finally, the fifth tip is just over document everything. Ordinary and necessary business expenses, the non-payroll expenses count. Make sure that you make an informed decision whether to use an 8-week or a 24-week covered period. For payroll costs, the over documentation, and I'm not suggesting that you will need to upload all of these documents when you apply for forgiveness, but definitely you want to have those on hand and saved in case you are ever audited for your PPP loan forgiveness. Time cards for your employees, W-4s showing that people are indeed employees, because there's a lot of fraud apparently that's going on, and fraud in this situation, if they catch you, they'll put you in jail for 30 years, which none of us want. So make sure you've got everything saved, payroll check copies. If you're doing electronic, like direct deposits for your employees, make sure you're showing that. Keep your bank statements for your covered period and have those available to upload bank statements when you're submitting your forgiveness application. Receipts, other payroll reports, make sure you have those also saved. And then again, for your non-payroll costs, make sure you have copies of your actual rental agreement or lease agreement. Utility bills, save those. I don't think you're gonna have to upload those, but be sure you have those available. And then if you have a mortgage with a bank or other lender, make sure you're keeping those agreements also. Other receipts that you want to keep are for health insurance and for retirement plan contributions. You probably won't need to upload those, but be sure that you have saved those and that you have those available in case they are requested. And if they ever do come and audit you, you will have to document both date and amounts, the date paid and the amount that you spent. And over document, please, and make sure you've got copies of everything in digital and in paper format as well. So my tip again, don't wait until the last minute to gather and keep your documentation. You do want to have everything. I would put it in a one big binder or electronic folder, make sure you back it up. I've had situations with the IRS that a client, their house burned down and they were being audited. The IRS said they didn't care and they had to pay this huge tax bill. So I'm assuming the SBA is going to be similar. So make sure that you back up all your documents in more than one digital format. So just a little bit more information about the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. So the forgiveness of this loan will be deemed tax-free. So I've had a lot of questions about this. Based on the law that was passed and based on what the IRS is saying, the loan is tax-free if you're granted forgiveness. However, and this is just crazy and we're still waiting for some answers. The IRS came out after the CARES Act was passed and issued guidance saying that the expenses that you use to pay for the expenses that you pay and that are forgiven won't be deductible if the loan is forgiven. So in my mind, this basically is, it's kind of as if it's going to be income. We are still waiting because people in Congress, the senators, said this is outrageous. This is not how they meant the law to be interpreted. And therefore, we're still waiting for Congress to come back and to pass an amendment to the original CARES Act stating that you can actually deduct the expenses and override the decision that the IRS has made. In the original CARES Act, there was no provision stating that you could deduct the expenses paid by PPP funds if that debt was forgiven. So we're still waiting for an answer on this. Therefore, a lot of the accountant community is stating don't file your forgiveness application quite yet, because we're hoping that not only will you get forgiveness of your PPP loan, that loan will then also be deemed tax-free and you'll get a deduction for the expenses. However, we're still waiting for this. But hopefully this will still change. There are 3 bills pending right now. So my advice is I would wait a little bit longer to apply for forgiveness for your PPP loan. I would gather your documentation and have everything ready to submit. I have a feeling that there will be some bills passed here, probably, let's say December 22nd is my guess. They love to do that to us. So a few other updates. If you did receive an EIDL advance or EIDL grant, As I mentioned earlier, this does reduce your PPP loan forgiveness. So it is, the EIDL was a grant, but if you did receive the PPP and it is forgiven, that grant converts to PPP, unforgivable loan. So you basically can't double dip. If the full amount of your PPP loan is not forgiven, your lender must continue to service your loan, and they also have to inform you when your first payment is due. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the interest rate is 1%, and the period to pay that back is 2 years if you received your PPP before June 5th, and 5 years if you received it after June 5th. So again, there are 3 pending bills in Congress. One of those bills is potentially going to offer a second round of funding for those businesses that haven't yet received a PPP loan. So if you know anyone who did not receive one and still wants to apply, that may still be up and coming. Then they may expand the allowable non-payroll cost category, another reason to wait to apply for forgiveness. And then another one bill actually may just grant automatic forgiveness for loans that are under a certain dollar amount. So again, you may want to wait. The process may be either further simplified, and you won't have to jump through all of these hoops. So just to keep in mind, automatic forgiveness doesn't mean that you don't have to document it if they ever come back and ask for documentation. You just won't have to apply for forgiveness if that becomes an option. So again, as I mentioned, the documentation that that relate to the forgiveness application that I mentioned, such as all those receipts and so on, I would suggest that you keep it for 6 years after the loan's paid off or your loan is forgiven in full, because the SBA can come back and audit your loan anytime during that 6-year period. So you definitely want to have those documents ready to just hand over to them so you don't have to scramble or sweat it at the last minute. So my advice is stay tuned. Things are ever changing. We will be providing updates as they change. And definitely reach out to us if you have any questions. A lot of clients are asking, what should I be doing right now? My advice to everyone is just get your paperwork ready. Make sure you're ready to apply when I really think there are gonna be some new rules coming out, so you may want to just wait a little bit. At Easy Life Management, we received a PPP loan. We have not applied for forgiveness quite yet. I'm waiting. I'm biding my time to see what happens in the next month or so. Definitely continue to keep formal books and records. If you were not using QuickBooks over your covered period, I would suggest hiring a bookkeeper right now and entering that information in QuickBooks so that you actually have formal books and records to submit if they ever come knocking. And make sure that you maintain and keep those documents for at least 6 years to show how your funding was spent. And then finally plan for the remainder of 2020. We still have a couple of months. Make sure that you have a business spending plan, a personal spending plan, and then most of all, breathe, because this stuff makes us all a little nervous. But we're here definitely to walk with you through all of the steps. So thank you for listening. I will take questions at this time. Feel free to either put it in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Great, Rachel, I'll read off the questions in the chat.
Great.
The first question, I got my PP loan through Chase. Can I request forgiveness directly on the SBA website, or do I have to wait for Chase to open up forgiveness applications?
My understanding is that you have to go through your lender.
Okay.
And I'm with Chase as well.
Second question, I got mine through Cabbage, which is now run by Case Servicing, and they said to wait to apply for forgiveness.
Yes, that's my advice as well.
Okay, and then do they need to ask for the 3508S form?
They should be emailing you as soon as their portal opens up. So I would wait to hear from your lender.
Okay. We got both PPP and idle money. We use the money for payroll. Do we add the dollars to PPP to extend the amount of PPP, or do we just pay it back?
The idle amount will be, you have to pay that back.
Now that we're outside the covered period, can I feel free to make changes to staffing and compensation plans? We brought on a 1099 employee to help with the FTE count.
Yes, you absolutely can make those changes.
Okay, and then the second part of that question, if I spent my entire PPP amount on my employees, do I even have to worry about owner compensation calculations?
You always need to take the wage caps and then the owner wage caps into consideration.
Okay, next question, do we need all payroll for every week?
Yes.
Okay. And then this question has to do with lease. Our lease was up on 4/1/2020. We signed a new lease on 6/1/2020 with another location.
That is a good question. I know that there is, based on the SBA interim financial rules or final rules, they did say if you renew your lease, but so I'm assuming because your lease was in effect, was your lease in effect prior to February 15th, 2020, the initial lease?
It says our lease was up on 4/1/2020. So I'm assuming it was in effect.
Okay, so assuming that the first lease was in effect prior to February 15th, 2020, and you signed a new lease, did the former landlord not agree to extend the lease, or was it just a decision to move?
You know what, if that person with the question, Maureen, if you want to unmute and answer that question.
Hi, yes, we were already going to change locations. We were very unhappy with the management of the place we were at. So our lease was coming up at the end of, or beginning of April. And this was already in plans since January.
Okay.
So we've signed with completely different management since then. So, you know, obviously we went home at the beginning of March. There was no reason to sign a lease because we didn't know where we were going to end up.
Right.
So then we came back on and we had found a new location with, you know, the facilities that we wanted. We have a new lease, but we, yeah. Which
do you have
like a punishment?
Yeah. Do you have any documentation showing that you, or email correspondence or anything?
Oh, we have lots of disparaging emails with the prior management. Yes.
I would just keep those, and I think that if it came down to an audit, that they would allow that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next question. I seem to remember the max payroll you could deduct was 2.5 your monthly payroll. Is that still in effect? For example, my loan was slightly more than 2.5 monthly payroll with the 24 weeks. It would cover my full loan. So can I simply use the full loan to payroll?
What sort of business entity are you?
I'm an S Corp. I'm an LLC who's an S Corp.
Okay, I would say most likely yes. And I know who that is, so I'll follow up with you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, next question. As a sole proprietor, can you use 100% for draws payroll?
Yes, and you want to be able to document that that money went to your personal account. So hopefully you transferred it or wrote yourself checks.
All right, and the last question in the chat is, I got an EIDL in addition to the PPP, but it was one lump sum and there was no breakdown of the 10,000 grant.
Well, that's interesting because it comes from two different sources. So you're saying you just received one deposit? Does that person want to unmute?
Oops. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, here I am. Yeah, so I'm confused about this because we got the PPP first, and then I got the EIDL about a month later, but it was one lump sum. It's $150,000. And I talked to somebody at the SBA, And I asked him, because I knew that 10,000 was considered a grant, but it was all calculated as one loan for $150,000. So how's $10,000 become a grant?
So Sandra, was that an EIDL loan? And
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm assuming then that wasn't a paycheck protection loan.
Yeah, it was.
Was it? Okay.
Well, the PPP was first, and then I got the EIDL.
And how much was the PPP?
About 60,000.
Okay, right. So the 60,000, that is the amount that you're going to use and to achieve forgiveness on. The $10,000 is part of the 150,000. So
Right.
the assumption is that you would then have to apply for forgiveness for $50,000 for your PPP, because you've got 60,000 PPP minus the $10,000, which was lumped in with the $150,000 EIDL.
Okay, so do I pay off? Because I paid off a lot of the EIDL, almost all of it now. So
Okay.
should I pay off the whole 150,000 and then apply for and assume that 10,000 of the PPP, because I'm assuming the whole 60,000 of the PPP will be forgiven.
Yes, I would pay off the 150,000 in full and then apply for forgiveness for the $60,000.
Okay.
And I think you should be able to achieve that, assuming that you meet the 60% rule, et cetera, et cetera.
Hey,
Okay.
Rachel, can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Sure. Is that Lloyd?
So there are three things there. There's the $10,000 EIDL grant that was thrown out there for everybody, right? Then there was PPP, and then there was an ability to apply for, with SBA, an EIDL loan, which is the 30-year, 3.5% or whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
So it's the $10,000 grant that affects the PPP, not this other EIDL loan that you went after, right?
Correct.
Okay.
See, that part's really confusing.
It is very confusing. The way that I look at it is, if you achieve full forgiveness on your PPP, then you're not also getting the grant. If the grant is then not forgiven, is not excluded, if that makes sense. You can't double dip on it. So So let's just take your example for just for example's sake. So if your PPP is $60,000, and we want to say that of the 150 that you received of the EIDL, 10,000 of that is a grant. So you'd either pay back the $140,000, and then that $10,000 goes over to reduce the amount that can be forgiven with the PPP. Does that make sense? There's no way they're going to allow you to double dip on that.
So I can't ask for 60,000 forgiveness for the PPP and then expect a $10,000 grant as part of the EIDL.
Right, exactly.
Okay, I get that.
So I would
I
would completely separate them out in your mind. Just say EIDL is EIDL and PPP is PPP, or you can apply for $50,000 of forgiveness for PPP and then pay back $140,000 of your EIDL. But it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It's exactly the same effect at the end of the day. You're paying back the same amount of money.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Does anyone have anything else, or did everybody go to sleep?
Just as a following question with the 8 versus the 24. So we got our loan, our PPP loan on June 1st.
Okay.
We were well on our way to spending that entire loan within the first 8 weeks, and then they extended it to 24. Now in that first 8 weeks, it was payroll plus rent and all the utilities and all that stuff. But now that it's been 24, we have spent completely the PPP loan on just payroll. So that sounds like the most straightforward path to forgiveness is just submit payroll against the loan and then get the forgiveness if it's granted. Is that
exactly? And I would use the 24-week covered period because the owner wage caps are higher.
So back on that, I mean, if I've spent that entire loan on my employees, why do I, and you could, like, if I was going to be doing this on the 8 week and I was going to decide which rent and what utilities and payroll and kind of put together that package and then submit forgiveness, why underneath the 24 week if I've already if I've already used that whole PPP loan just on employee payroll, why do I even have to worry about?
You don't.
Okay, so when I make my submission, I can just submit employee payroll records to satisfy the forgiveness application, and I don't have to do any of that other.
In an ideal world, yes. So
Okay.
we'll see. You can appeal their decision is the good news.
Okay.
Any other questions from anyone? All right. Well, if you are interested in having the slide deck, please email Kathy@carlsbad.org and I will make sure that you get a copy of the slide deck.
Rachel, I have a question.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Rachel. I put it in the chat, but just now. I heard somewhere that if a shareholder's salary is greater than $100,000, then that shareholder salary cannot be calculated into the forgiveness.
It can, but it's subject to those wage caps that we discussed.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yes. Anything else from anyone?
Thank you so much.
You're really welcome. It's nice to see all of you. Hey,
Rachel,
Benny,
thank you. Thank you so much for doing this today. We really appreciate it.
you are welcome. And we will be back when there are updates. I'm sure there will be.
What's the responsibility for the
Thank you, Rachel.
trailer? You can also write.